Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. So we've finally arrived to late August, and here I was thinking that the warmer weather would start or whatever, and doesn't seem to be at the moment. I'll overlay some some photos that I shared with you before, Steve, just about the fog that occurred this morning, and it's quite unusual for late August anyway here to see this type of sight. I did enjoy it. It's kind of got that feeling like of a city in the clouds kind of thing, because you feel like you're floating. But it was kind of unusual, and because typically that would be like a late June, July type of experience. But yeah, it's just strange with, we can bang on about the weather and all that sort of stuff, but obviously there was the reports of, the much wetter sort of seasons that we're having, and that this seems to be like a continuation of it. Nice sight, but a bit unusual to start the day off anyway.
Yeah, it's certainly really quite remarkable to see that. And like you say, it's Cloud City. I hope you're
Yeah,
enjoying it.
yeah, absolutely. Um, all right, well, apparently something that Apple employees are apparently not enjoying are this idea of a mandated return to work for 3 days, which apparently the latest push by management to get people back into the office is like kind of said that they have to be in on a Tuesday and a Thursday with leaders in specific teams then deciding what the third day would be. Presumably because they want to make sure that not everyone comes in on a Wednesday, so that there's ultra long weekends or whatever. But it's interesting that Apple's experiencing this pushback, because I guess I think even Steve Jobs said this, that the whole point of the spaceship campus was, to encourage an environment where people could run into each other, exchange ideas, build on things, and that kind of requires in-person attendance at the campus, i.e., in the office. So if everyone's working from home, there's less likelihood of that type of interaction to happen. And it may be that Apple's going to have a bit of a interesting challenge in this regard, because there seems to be a clear intent to want to get their staff back in, but they don't want to come back in because they've had it good working from home during the pandemic, because they've found that they can do that.
Yeah, well, COVID's changed the world, hasn't it? And I remember us discussing, potential impacts of COVID around the social outcomes right at the start of COVID. And, any situation that lasts longer than 6 weeks breaks habits, and any situation which lasts a couple of years breeds new habits. And I think there's a bit of a theme running through today's topics, but one of those now is people deciding how they want to work. And if you work in a knowledge industry, in IT, or any of the tech companies, really, as I think as we've all experienced with video conferencing and connectivity through multiple media channels and personal channels, you know, you can limit the time that you need to be in the office, and obviously productivity as well. There are a lot of companies around the world grappling with how do you get people back in. I think everyone's given up on any idea that there will ever be a 5 day in the office week unless you actually face to face customer service or something like that. Um, yeah, it's very difficult. We've seen Facebook in recent weeks sort of, use the productivity carrot or stick, I'm not sure which one, to try and get more from their workforce. And I think Apple's grappling with the same problem. If you've had 2 years working from home and you love it, well, maybe you could be convinced to come back in for two, but three might be a struggle. So I guess this is just something else we'll watch and evolve. And certainly for, I think, younger staff, uh, and probably younger generations now who've entered the workforce and been in the workforce for under a decade, they have very strong views about this. They have a lot of confidence about expressing what they need, and maybe to some extent they're rebelling against the nature of work that the older generations have experienced. So good luck to everybody in this. I certainly think it's opening a new chapter and new opportunities.
Absolutely. One other quick thing that I did want to touch on this topic was because I've heard it in a couple of different places now, is this idea that if you don't have face to face interaction, you could have a work culture problem develop because you don't have the establishment of relationships effectively. Because, yes, you could do work by communicating through screens. That's not the issue. It's that there's an aspect to human interaction that requires in person the interaction to be in person in order to develop the culture, the positive work culture about feeling like you're connected to the rest of the organization and that sort of thing. And I've heard this in a couple of different places now that there's a concern about that. That it's inevitable that if everyone's 100% working from home, the work culture could suffer in a way.
Oh, look, I don't disagree with that, but to me, increasingly the rest of our personal lives are being depersonalized. People, will text people, you know, in the next room rather than go and see them, or Zoom them, in the next building rather than go and see them. And that's in personal life. So why would you change in your work life? I don't advocate for either scenario, by the way, but you know, I don't see how important it. Yeah, well, it can be as important to employers as they like, but if people aren't doing it in their personal life, I don't see how you can convince them to do it at work. And I think that's where the actual battle is.
And I think this will be a decade-long thing that we'd have to examine. I think this is a longer-term project to see what the long-term effects will be over a longer period of time.
Totally.
I guess speaking of COVID impacts, Australia's tourism sector is having a bit of a time at the moment, which is understandable. Things are not back to normal. There might be an impression that we've gone back to normal to an extent, running around doing our usual things because we don't have lockdowns, COVID restrictions in place on what we can and can't do like we've had for the past 2 years. But obviously, there's still some impediments on getting international travel happening across the board. Just as an example, like Japan and China, that's not a thing in terms of individual tourism. You can't just catch a plane and go to either one of those countries and be a tourist because it's a banned thing. Similarly, not that we're banning people coming in for tourism in Australia, but there's no I guess people aren't feeling motivated to do that traveling because of everything that's been going on, and also things like flights can be really expensive. They can also have issues. There's been hearing plenty of stories about things like lost luggage, cancelled flights that have been a lot more prevalent since the airline industry started to kick back into gear in the past 6 to 12 months, for instance. And don't even get me started on Qantas on this one, but that's kind of led to a situation where, in terms of international tourists coming to Australia, they're probably not feeling comfortable coming over just yet, and obviously the tourism industry is suffering from it. So things like I remember in that ABC article that I was reading through where one operator was only really seeing like 15% of usual activity in his business, and yes, he's getting some domestic input there, but the big money is the international tourists that come in and spend lots of money. So it's a tricky situation, I think, for everyone. I think it can only be mended with time, really, as the cogs of society come back online. We did go through a fairly significant disruption, 2 year disruption. So just expecting it to snap your fingers and it goes back to what it was in 2019, I think is unrealistic. But at the same time, people who are in industries where their livelihoods depend on this sort of stuff, it's hard. But at the same time, we're not in a normal situation. We're still not back to normal. What do you do? Kind of thing.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think what we're seeing though is the new normal. We just spoke about how COVID has changed habits. If you think about it, to 2019, you had continual marketing campaigns that have been going on for years, convincing people that traveling to a certain destination was on their bucket list and whatever else. So that fueled international travel, and To some extent, yes. I mean, traveling by air anywhere in the world was probably at peak efficiency at that point. Um, but the truth is, we all know actually that international travel is a hassle, even when things run smoothly. You can, it might take you 6 hours before to get to and to be at the airport before you actually depart, depending on the airport where you're flying from and where you're flying to. And then you might be on a 12 and in some cases over 20-hour trip. So the hassle, it is a big hassle. You've got to really, one, want to go, and two, you've really got to be sold on the idea that you'll put yourself through the experience of visiting an airport, which I can't believe anyone would say is pleasant. When you then couple in with that, the travel difficulties now and just the stories of disruption, the expense now, and the fact that for the last 2 years we've had campaigns telling us to holiday at home, I think that's really what's affecting the travel industry globally. I'd love to go overseas, but I have to say, it used to always be at the top of my mind. At the moment, probably not.
Yeah, and I second that. I was a fairly frequent international traveler, pre-pandemic, but I can't, and I was grateful that, we were in the position to be able to, do that sort of stuff, across the board for so many people. It opened up the world for so many people, but at the same time, for me personally, like, yeah, I haven't done it for, effectively 3 years now, and it's okay. I'm not like clamoring to go overseas anytime soon. So that's just the nature of the beast as it is now, and things can change.
Absolutely, that's so true.
Absolutely. And finally, returning to a topic we've covered a couple of times, which is batteries, and in this case, long-term storage batteries, and just looking at the options of what's available and what we can do as we go forward. Obviously trying to transition over to renewables and how batteries are actually going to have to play a part in the overall solution in terms of being able to deliver consistent electricity for anyone, for all of us around the world, because renewables obviously sort of come and go in terms of their supply, and we have to have sort of storage backup requirements that can kick in. The issue obviously being is that current lithium-ion batteries, as good as they are, have a host of issues associated with them. We can talk about the fact that what they're made of is ultimately probably not sustainable in the long term if it was to really kick into gear, that we produce a lot of them. But then there's also the fact that they don't last as long as what we need them to, and a whole range of other things. So obviously looking at different technologies and different elements that can be used to construct a battery. This DW clip that I watched about the idea of salt or sand being used as an element in constructing a battery was fascinating. They also obviously showed off a lot of other different types of options that could be used, and I can't recall the name of it, but I remember they mentioned one that was completely renewable, reusable, which sounded like a pretty good thing. And it's interesting that so much, I'm sure they'll crack this at some point, because it's a necessity that we're going to need to get to it, and it's fascinating. Like, I'm going to enjoy that world when we get to it, because it's going to be like, that's going to be transformative when that becomes like a wide scale, big scale operation. But the other thing that kind of occurred to me through looking at this is, it's interesting that, a bit like fossil fuels. Batteries, great. They when they were sort of first implemented and discovered to be used in the manner in which they're being used, it sort of transformed the world. But it was a finite resource with environmental impacts. And it's interesting that in both of those situations, we're now having to go to exploring options that are going to be ultimately sustainable and better for the environment. And it's interesting the trajectory that's gone in over a couple of 100 years, effectively, if you count fossil fuel use as well.
Yeah, well, look, I think what you've seen here is, lithium maybe turning into, say, something like the DVD. It, you know, Lithium batteries are fantastic for small devices like phones or laptops, but above that, they're not really optimal. The technologies that they've developed for batteries have made it possible to use them for backup power for housing, and for powering electric vehicles. But it's not an optimum format, energy storage format, really, for those things, for all the reasons that we've sort of spoken about. And the technology now is relatively old, so they've been improving it, and they've changed the membranes, they've changed catalysts, and but it's at its limit. And there are other options, and the technologies now that we're now seeing developed are going to take us into another sort of era of batteries. Some will still have lithium, but others will have other materials. They'll have salts and sand and whatever else you can imagine. As catalysis, as they start to use artificial intelligence to design membranes and catalysts that will work within a battery or energy storage environment. And they use different types of battery, not just necessarily chemical, but it could be heat storage batteries as well. I think we'll see a very different landscape over the next 10 years. And of course, you've pointed out the sustainability question. It was great, at first for lithium, but now when you consider that we've just decided everything has to have lithium storage, it's just not sustainable. And we still don't really have the right recycling tools either for lithium batteries. So, yeah, something will have to give. A new technology will rise, and let's hope it's a good one.
Yeah, and just finally on that, I'm always fascinated by the physics behind a lot of this stuff and the way it's sort of determined how it works. Like like you're saying, like the heat using moving energy into different forms in order to make it storable or reusable or whatever. It's really quite fascinating. Like just on the pure science of it, how it works. It almost seems like I won't call it magic or whatever, because that's a bit of an odd term to use for something that's scientifically driven. But it's just interesting that these discoveries have been quite sort of groundbreaking in that way, just using the tools that we have discovered over so long.
Well, that's right. And as I say, the technology that's available now to design new types of batteries wasn't really even available 5 years ago at the scale it is today. Artificial intelligence, models, all sorts of things that can simulate environments and allow them to do the science much more quickly to build working prototypes. So that's where it's headed. It's very exciting. And I think that, for all the people that are very concerned about, climate and net zero, I think actually that we're only now, in the last decade, we've actually developed the tools that will allow us to transition away. And they will probably still take another 10 years to get mature, but I think you'll see at that point the transition will occur very, very quickly, much more quickly than we can imagine it happening today.
Absolutely. All right, well, on that note, the fog's lifted over here, so maybe I can go for a walk now. Not feeling like I'm going through some low cloud cover. Thanks again for that, Steve. And I guess we'll hopefully get another foggy day at some point.
That's guaranteed. Question is when.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so don't forget to check out our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, RSS feeds, etc. We've got all of our content, and you can watch us on any and all of your devices in any manner you wish, and we greatly appreciate your visits and views. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.